Welcome back, everyone. Ready to get a little spooky?
Always.
All right, well, buckle up, because today's deep dive takes us into the world of demonic deception.
Oh, this is going to be good.
So we're going to be looking at all sorts of sources, from folklore and mythology to religious texts, to try to understand how these beings, these demons, are said to trick us.
Right, because whether you believe in these entities literally or not, these stories have fascinated people for centuries.
Yeah, and they might actually reveal some pretty deep truths about the human psyche. I mean, why are we so drawn to these tales of trickery and manipulation?
That's a great question. And I think one of the things that makes these stories so compelling is how they tap into our deepest desires and fears.
Right, like they're exploiting our vulnerabilities, showing us how easily we can be misled when we're not paying attention.
Exactly. And the fascinating thing is that you see these themes pop up again and again in cultures all over the world.
It's like a universal playbook of deception.
I like that, a playbook. And I think we can break down this playbook into a few key categories, starting with the classics.
The greatest hits,
Yeah, the tried and true methods. So we're talking about things like manipulating the truth.
making things seem like they're not what they really are.
Right, or making promises of power, wealth, forbidden knowledge.
Basically dangling those things we all kind of secretly crave.
Because let's be honest, who wouldn't want a little more power or wealth?
Or maybe even a glimpse into the unknown.
But these stories warn us that there's always a catch. You know, a hidden cost, a price to pay.
Like in that classic story of Faust.
Oh, yeah, the guy who sells his soul to the devil for unlimited knowledge and worldly pleasures.
Doesn't seem like such a good deal in the end.
Not at all. And that's a recurring theme, right? These beings are portrayed as fundamentally malevolent.
So you're saying even if their promises sound tempting, they're ultimately empty.
Exactly. They're designed to lead us astray.
Okay, so let's say we ignore all those red flags.
We fall for those classic tricks.
Well, our sources paint a pretty grim picture of what happens next.
Yeah, things definitely take a darker turn.
What are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, loss of freedom, moral corruption, even physical harm.
Ouch.
But it goes beyond just the individual,
It does.
definitely. Demonic deception, according to these traditions, can sow discord among people.
It can break down relationships.
Absolutely. It erodes trust, creates conflict, and imagine the chaos that could unfold.
Wow, that's scary. It's like a ripple effect, poisoning not just individuals, but entire communities.
Exactly. And I think that's where we start to see the psychological and social impacts of all of this.
The real-world consequences.
Right. Because if you're constantly being manipulated and deceived, it can lead to all sorts of problems.
Like what?
Well, isolation for one.
You push people away because you don't know who to trust anymore.
Right. And then you have mental health struggles, anxiety, depression, paranoia.
It can really mess you up.
Yeah, and the erosion of trust, not just in others, but potentially in yourself.
Because if you can't even trust your own thoughts, where do you turn?
Exactly.
So we've got those classic tricks. We've got the pretty awful consequences. But our sources don't stop there.
Oh no, they go deeper.
They introduce what you might call advanced deception.
And that's when things get really unsettling.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, one of the big ones is possession, the idea of a demon literally taking control of your body and mind.
Yeah, that's straight out of a horror movie.
Right. But then there's the concept of corruption of the soul, which is even more insidious.
Because that's not just about being tricked. It's about being fundamentally changed.
Exactly.
Having your moral compass shattered.
Your very essence warped and twisted. And that's why these narratives are so powerful.
The warnings.
Exactly. They're urging us to be vigilant, to question what we believe, to be wary of influences that could undermine our well-being.
Okay, so we've covered classic deception, the scary consequences, those more advanced soul-corrupting tactics. But what about the subtle stuff? The lesser-known tricks? This is where it gets really creepy for me.
Oh, yeah, because we're talking about tactics that are designed to be almost invisible.
To fly under the radar.
Exactly. And they can really mess with your head.
Like what?
Well, there's the idea of demons mimicking our own inner thoughts.
Whoa.
Right. It's like they're hijacking your internal dialogue. So you think you're coming up with these ideas, but really it's something else whispering in your ear.
It's like in the movie Inception, planting those ideas.
Exactly. And then there's the concept of false epiphanies.
So you think you're having this sudden realization, this moment of clarity.
And it feels so real, so divine, but In reality, it's a carefully constructed illusion.
Designed to lead you astray.
Exactly. And they can even amplify your existing anxieties.
So those little worries we all have.
They blow them out of proportion until they completely paralyze you.
That's terrifying.
Right. And in one of our sources, there's this really chilling example where a demon plants a false memory.
Oh, well.
Yeah. And it creates this huge conflict within a family. It's heartbreaking. And it shows just how insidious this kind of manipulation can be.
Because you're questioning your own memories, your own experiences.
Exactly. And that's precisely why these tactics are so dangerous. They're often really hard to detect.
So if these demonic influences are so subtle, how can you even tell if you're experiencing them?
That's the million-dollar question.
Do our sources offer any clues?
They do. But I want to emphasize that interpreting these signs is tricky. It requires caution and critical thinking.
Right, we're not saying every bad thought or strange feeling is a sign of demonic possession.
Not at all. But there are some red flags to be aware of.
Okay, so according to our sources, what should we be looking out for?
Well, one of the big ones is uncharacteristic negative thoughts.
Okay, so like more than just your average bad mood.
Right. So, for example, sudden urges to harm yourself or others.
Whoa, that's intense.
Yeah. Or maybe a sudden aversion to spiritual practices that you used to find comforting.
Or maybe withdrawing from your loved ones.
Isolating yourself. Yeah. And then there are the more perceptual distortions.
Seeing things, hearing things.
Exactly. Like something straight out of a horror movie. And if you're experiencing any of these things, especially if they're intense or persistent, it's crucial to seek professional guidance.
Don't just try to tough it out on your own.
Exactly. Because remember, these signs could indicate other underlying issues as well, so it's important to explore all possibilities.
So you're saying don't jump to conclusions.
Exactly. Get help, talk to someone you trust, and figure out what's really going on.
Okay, so let's say you suspect something's amiss. You're experiencing some of these signs. What can you actually do about it? What steps can you take to protect yourself?
Well, our sources offer a variety of approaches, and it's fascinating how they differ across cultures and belief systems.
So there's no one-size-fits-all solution?
Not necessarily, but there are some common threads.
Okay, like what?
Well, a lot of traditions emphasize spiritual cleansing practices.
Okay, give me an example.
So things like prayer, meditation, or rituals that are specific to that belief system.
So things that help you feel spiritually grounded.
Exactly. And seeking support from loved ones is crucial too.
Don't isolate yourself.
Right. Talk to trusted friends or family members about what you're experiencing.
And of course, there's always professional guidance.
From spiritual advisors, therapists, people who are trained to help you navigate these experiences.
So the takeaway here is don't go it alone.
Exactly. Build a support system, find people you can trust, and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Because facing these challenges is a lot easier when you've got people in your corner.
Absolutely. And it's not just about having those external supports. It's about cultivating your own inner strength, too.
Yeah, making yourself less susceptible to those negative influences.
Exactly. Like building up your mental and spiritual immune system.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And a lot of our sources emphasize that, don't they? The importance of surrounding yourself with positive influences.
Absolutely. Whether it's through your faith, your relationships, your hobbies, even just the things you choose to focus on.
It's about creating an environment of positivity.
Exactly. Because let's face it, if you're already feeling depleted or lost, you're going to be a much easier target.
It's like being more susceptible to a virus when your immune system is already weak.
Right. And that's why these stories often emphasize the importance of things like moral integrity and self-awareness.
So the more you understand your own vulnerabilities, your own desires,
the better you'll be at resisting anyone who tries to exploit them.
It's about knowing yourself.
Exactly. Your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, all of that.
Okay. I have to admit, though, I'm still really hung up on this whole idea of demons mimicking our inner thoughts.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the creepier aspects of all of this.
It's like, how can you even tell the difference between your own voice and something else?
That's a question that's been debated for centuries, and honestly, there's no easy answer.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-boggling.
It is, but I think our sources do offer some interesting clues. They suggest paying close attention to the nature of the thoughts themselves.
Okay, so what do you mean by that?
Well, ask yourself, are these thoughts unusually negative? Do they seem out of character for you? Are they urging you toward harmful or destructive behaviors? Do they contradict your core values and beliefs?
So it's not just about having negative thoughts, because everyone has those from time to time.
Exactly. It's about whether those thoughts align with who you are at your core.
Whether it feels like your authentic self, or something alien and intrusive.
Right. And also pay attention to the intensity and persistence of these thoughts.
Okay, so if it's just a fleeting thought, you're probably fine.
But if you're suddenly bombarded with urges to harm yourself or others, or you're feeling this overwhelming sense of dread and despair, that's when you need to seek help.
Yeah, don't dismiss those feelings as just negativity.
Exactly. It might be something more.
So let's say someone is experiencing these signs, and they're starting to think maybe something weird is going on. What's next?
Well, our sources talk about a lot of different actions people have taken throughout history to address suspected demonic influence.
Oh, like what?
It's really fascinating how these practices vary across cultures and belief systems.
So there's no one right way to do it.
Not necessarily. Some traditions focus on rituals of purification.
Okay, so like what? Give me an example.
Well, you've probably heard of smudging with sage or using holy water.
Yeah, or reciting specific prayers or incantations.
Exactly. And others emphasize strengthening your connection to a higher power.
So through prayer, meditation, acts of devotion.
Right. And some traditions use things like talismans or amulets.
Objects that are believed to have protective powers.
Right. And it's interesting how all of these practices, even though they're different, they all tap into this human desire for protection.
For something that can ward off evil and keep us safe.
Exactly. And whether or not these practices have actual power, the belief in them can be really powerful in itself.
It's about feeling empowered, feeling protected.
Exactly. It's about finding what resonates with you, what brings you comfort and strength.
Okay, I have to ask though, what about exorcisms?
Ah, yes, the classic solution in so many demon-related stories.
But are they real? Are they effective?
Well, it really depends on who you ask. Exorcisms are definitely a controversial topic, and they're often misunderstood.
Yeah, because in movies they always seem so dramatic and intense.
Right. But in most traditions, exorcisms are considered a last resort.
And they should only be performed by someone who's trained and has authority to do so.
Exactly. This is not a DIY project.
Definitely not something to try at home with your roommate in a YouTube tutorial.
No, absolutely not. Exorcisms are serious spiritual interventions, and they should be approached with extreme caution and respect.
So not something to mess around with.
Definitely not. But I think it's interesting how these beliefs about demonic influence have persisted for so long.
Yeah, why do you think that is?
I think it's because they tap into some very real human fears and anxieties.
The fear of the unknown, the fear of losing control.
Exactly. And also the fear of being manipulated or deceived.
Because that can happen to anyone, right? It doesn't require a demon.
Absolutely. We can be manipulated by other people, by institutions, by our own biases and beliefs.
So in a way, these stories about demonic deception can serve as a metaphor for those more everyday forms of manipulation.
Right. They remind us to be critical thinkers, to question what we're told, and to always be on guard for those who might try to take advantage of us.
That's a really good point. Because even if you don't believe in demons in the literal sense, there's still plenty of demons out there in the metaphorical sense.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most important takeaways from all of this. These stories, even the ones that seem fantastical, they can teach us a lot about the nature of manipulation, vulnerability, and the power of belief.
Yeah, because ultimately it's about understanding the human condition.
Our capacity for both good and evil.
And recognizing that we're not alone in this.
We have each other, we have our communities, and we have the wisdom of those who came before us.
As reflected in these stories and traditions.
Exactly. They're a reminder that we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
And that we have the power to choose our own path.
Even in the face of darkness and deception.
We've been talking about all these dark and creepy tactics of demonic deception.
Yeah, it's been a pretty intense journey.
It has, but, you know, even though these stories are full of warnings and cautionary tales, they also kind of highlight the strength of the human spirit.
Oh, absolutely. They're not just meant to scare us, you know?
Right.
They're meant to teach us something, to remind us that we have this amazing ability to resist manipulation, to overcome challenges.
And to choose a path of goodness and truth.
Exactly.
So it's not just about being afraid of demons.
It's about recognizing our own power, the power to make choices, to shape our own destinies.
And that's where faith comes in, right?
Yeah, faith in whatever form resonates with you. Whether it's faith in a higher power,
Faith in ourselves.
faith in humanity, it can be such a powerful antidote to that fear and despair.
Yeah, it can give us that courage to face our challenges.
And the strength to resist those negative influences that are always going to be out there.
It reminds me of that quote, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Well, I mean, there are probably a few other things to be cautious of, but
Yeah, of course.
you get the point, right? It's about not being a passive victim. It's about taking control.
And realizing we have that power within us.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have, from those classic tricks to the more subtle tactics, the signs of demonic influence.
And the ways to protect ourselves.
Yeah, we really went deep.
But what's the big takeaway? What do we want our listeners to remember?
I think the key thing is this. Demonic deception, as it's depicted in all these different traditions, it's complex, it's multifaceted.
It's definitely creepy.
But even if the whole concept seems fantastical, understanding those tactics, the ways demons are said to trick us,
Right.
it can teach us a lot about manipulation in general.
And about vulnerability, about the power of belief.
And about ourselves.
Exactly. And I think even if you don't believe in demons, literally,
Right.
these stories can still be really valuable.
Like metaphors.
Yeah, metaphors for the challenges we all face in life.
The temptations, the doubts, those inner voices that try to lead us astray.
But ultimately, we do have the power to choose our own path.
To make our own decisions.
And to find that strength within ourselves.
Exactly.
Well, that's a great note to end on. But before we go, I have one final thought for you all to ponder.
Ooh, I love a good cliffhanger.
If, as these stories suggest, demons can exploit our desires and fears, what other forces out there, maybe even ones that seem harmless, might be using those same tactics in our lives? Something to think about, isn't it?
It definitely is, and that's what makes these stories so timeless and relevant even today.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into demonic deception. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and as always, thanks for listening.